Hello and welcome back to another episode of Science Radio. This is our first episode for 2025. My name's Jesse and I'm joined once again by my co-host Zanita. Hello, Zanita.
Hello, everyone. Great to be back.
And today we are answering the all-important question that may have been on your mind at this point in time, but may have escaped very, very quickly as the new year has turned around. And that is behavior change really possible? And what do we get wrong about behavior change? And to do that, we are talking today to Simon Matthews. Simon has written a fantastic article about behavior change in the Jan-Feb issue of Science of the Times. So thank you, Simon, for writing the article, and thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, Simon, I want to just get the heavy stuff out of the way right off the bat. A lot of the time when people think about behavior change, they quite cynically think, well, you know, we can change habits for a short period of time. Maybe we can, get a good eating plan for a couple of weeks. Maybe we can exercise for a couple of months. But inevitably, we always go back to our old ways. And so as a psychologist, as an academic, as somebody who has obviously thought and studied about this for a very long time, is behavior change possible?
It's absolutely possible. We can all demonstrate that for ourselves very, very, very easily. It's important to understand that we can kind of separate behavioural change in some ways into two groups. Initiating behaviour change is ridiculously easy. Super, super easy, and there are so many different ways that we can do that. So, for example, if you're driving your car down the down the freeway, and let's say you're just exceeding the speed limit just by a little bit, maybe you're doing 120 or 125, and up ahead you see a car parked on the side that seems to have an irregularly shaped roof. What are you thinking now? Well, you're probably thinking, like most people, that seems to be a highway patrol car park. So what do? Well, you back off the accelerator a little bit. You've changed your behaviour, just like that. Super, super easy. If you're also like most people, once you've gone around the next bend in the freeway and that police car's out of sight, you will probably resume your previous speed. So initiating behaviour change is super easy. Sustaining it is the slightly trickier part, and that's often where people start to feel a little dispirited or a little discouraged. We also see this at the beginning of every year. So December 31 of every calendar year in history represents the world's largest social experiment, where people all get together in groups or with their partners and families and so on and say, right, this year I'm going to, and then they name some resolution to modify their behaviour. So January 1 comes and they jump out of bed and say, today's the day, I'm going to do it. So maybe they do it, and January 2 comes and they do it. January 3 comes and we go back to work and they forget that morning, so they promise to catch up that evening. And January 4, they kind of do it again, and January 5 comes and one of the kids needs something, so they kind of forget again, but they promise to catch up and they do, and so on and so on. And the attempts at catching up become fewer and fewer until we reach what researchers have called Quitters Day, which is the second Friday in January. This year, 2025, that was January 10. It can be as late as January 14, of course. But by the second Friday in January, very many people have initiated a change and not sustained it. But there's good news amidst all of this. And the good news is that behaviour change is absolutely sustainable. And again, we can all turn to our own direct experience of this to demonstrate it very, very easily. If you're you could either think back to your own childhood. If you're a parent, you could think about young children. If you're a grandparent, think about your grandchildren. Do you or do any of your children or grandchildren walk? And the answer is almost certainly yes. Was there a time when they didn't walk? Again, the answer is yes, there was. There was a time when all of us as babies and infants, but first of all, we were lying on our backs, and then maybe we were sitting, maybe we were lying on our stomachs, then maybe we were crawling. Eventually, we walked. That's a change in behaviour. What was it driven by? Well, for many of us, it was driven by need or a sense of, frustration. I want that thing over there. I can't get it. I want to be able to reach that thing up there. So we learn to modify our behaviour, and guess what? We all sustain it. We keep it going. We don't. Once we've reached up to that high shelf and got that thing that we wanted from standing and walking, we don't then say to ourselves, "Oh, okay, well, I think I'll just go back to sitting and crawling for the rest of my life now." We keep it going. So behaviour change is absolutely sustainable, and I've dropped a little clue in there, with the right motivation.
I must admit, I'm surprised that the quitters' day is so early. I would have expected it would have been later in January or February, but I think I'm surprised because I feel like it's a well-known fact that people set New Year's resolutions and then by the end of January they quit. And so for me, I think in the past few years I've tried to be like, how can I set goals differently so that
it's very, very common.
Like you said, last year it was the 14th of January, and then this year it's the 10th of January. So it seems like we've gotten worse. And I guess I'm curious as someone who is, in the health and wellbeing space, who's a psychologist and a coach, how do you start your new year? Like, do you have ways of going into a new year that are more effective than, I guess, the old way of writing 20 goals and then failing most of it?
Well, to be honest, for a start, I don't ever bother making New Year's resolutions. I just make the decision about whatever I want to change, whenever that happens to be. I don't know, August 7, March 23. It really doesn't matter. So that the idea that we sort of construct a time to begin doing something new at the beginning of the year is kind of. I mean, I guess at some level I get the kind of, the cute appeal of it, but it really has no basis in anything. And in fact, it can represent what's called the decision behaviour gap. So if I decide on December 15 that on January 1 I'm going to start doing 20 push-ups a day, then December 15 through January 1 is a period of time that we could call the decision behaviour gap. So that's the time when I'm actually at most risk of not carrying through with that plan. If we use another frame or another way of thinking about it, sometimes when we say on such and such a date I will do something, that represents on our part a lack of complete certainty and commitment to that change. So in models of behavioural change, this is called contemplation. In other words, we're thinking about doing this, but we're just not yet completely convinced, or we're not completely certain that we have everything we need, or there's just that last little barrier or hurdle to jump over before we completely commit ourselves. So as a result, we often say, I really want to do this next week or next month. And of course, in the intervening time, what was the driving motivation often falls away, or we forget it, we disconnect from it, and so we don't carry through. So I start January 1 just like any other day of the year. I get out of bed and I have some coffee and get outside in the sunshine and do a bit of work and so on, do a bit of exercise, and all my decisions about behaviours that I might want to change in my life, I aim to make at the time they come into my mind, whatever date of the year that happens to be.
When they're fresh.
Yeah, exactly. And when I feel really connected to the reasons for doing it, when I'm still thinking about, this is why I wanted to do this. This is why this was important to me.
I think it would be helpful for us to perhaps name a few of the behavioral change, I guess, targets or aspirations that I think most people would identify with. Maybe that comes sort of naturally, but when I think about these things, I tend to think about things like exercise, weight loss, maybe quitting a vice, drinking or smoking, or even just, stopping eating so much McDonald's or ice cream
Yeah.
or whatever the case may be. And a lot of these come from a place, I suppose, of negativity, of feeling like my life is going in a direction I don't want it to go, or I'm not feeling my best, or I'm not feeling that good about myself. And so if it was just as simple as like, let me make a few tweaks to my life and then I'll feel better about myself, I'll feel better about where I'm going. Why is long-term
Yeah,
behavioral
what a great
change so
question.
difficult?
Yeah, what a great question. So your observation about the topics around which we make behavioural change, or we seek to make behavioural change, is spot on. And if we were to categorise them, we could say that most desired behavioural changes focus on health and/or relationships. And that actually tells us something really important about human beings. It tells us that those things are fundamentally what really matters to us. They're the things that are really important to us. We don't make we don't make New Year's resolutions about becoming. I'm going to make a New Year's resolution to become the president of the company this year, or I'm going to make a New Year's resolution to buy a new red sports car or something like that. Our New Year's resolutions are about our own health and well-being, and about our relationships with people who are significant to us, partners, children, so on. So that's an important thing to note. So we've just been talking about effectively needs, our needs for health and well-being, our needs for social connection, relationship, and so on. But needs get much more complex and nuanced than that. So, for example, one of my vices is chocolate. I love chocolate. And what I love in particular about the chocolate, you can buy some cheap chocolates that when you bite into them, they feel dry and crumbly in your mouth, and I don't particularly enjoy eating those. The chocolates that I like eating are the ones that when you bite into them, they feel sort of creamy and silky in your mouth, and that feeling just kind of goes through your whole mouth before you swallow the chocolate. So that's one of the sensory experiences that I really love, and it's one of the things that keeps me eating chocolate. At the same time, I also recognise that eating fresh fruit is good for my health. An apple, a banana, pineapple, pomegranate, whatever it may be. But you don't get the same lovely mouthfeel from eating an apple or an orange or something like that. So at different times in my life, I can have needs for different things which rub up against each other. I can simultaneously have part of me that says, I really need to eat healthy, and another part of me that says, oh man, I really want that feeling in my mouth that I get from eating chocolate. So all that's happening there is that because we're complex people with complex underlying needs, from time to time, in fact, many times, we experience those needs rubbing up against each other. And there's a word for that. It's not a psychological word, it's just an everyday word. It's called ambivalence. We feel ambivalent about something. And we feel ambivalent about lots of things in our daily lives. If you have a standing invitation to family roast dinner on Friday night, and on Friday afternoon, one of your friends rings you and says, hey, do you want to come to my place for dinner? Well, now you're probably feeling ambivalent. There's a part of you that wants to be with your family and a part of you that wants to be with your friend. There's nothing unusual about ambivalence. It's simply a facet of being human. And it's that ambivalence that I think can at least partly explain why we find it difficult to often make decisions about behavioural change and then follow them through, because we feel that underlying tension. We feel that ambivalence. There's a part of us that says, I want to do that. No, I really want to do that as well. And humans being humans, we will tend to default to the easiest, the least emotionally and cognitively taxing, or the most familiar option. Most of the time, that's what we'll do. Not always, but most of the time, we'll move in that direction. So. That's one of the reasons I think why it can be difficult to sustain behavioural change. It's also one of the reasons why having conversation with someone, for example, like a health coach, can be really useful, because that person can help you to get some clarity about what all those competing needs are. I've used an example of two needs competing against each other, but of course humans are way more complex than that. Sometimes we can have 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 or 6 needs all competing for our attention. When we don't have clarity about that, when we're unable to sort of see the individual parts, we can't then assemble the picture for ourselves. It's a bit like a Lego kit. If you buy a box of Lego and you have the instructions there and you tip all your Lego pieces on the floor, but you can't see the ones that are in the image you're looking at, then you can't assemble the model. You need to be able to see all those components first, then you can make decisions about how to put them together. And that's what people who specialise in behavioural change can help someone do.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you're saying, because it's like we say that knowledge is power, and obviously we all know, like the three of us know the damage of sugar, we know the damage of smoking, we know the damages of pornography, we know the damages of not exercising and not doing all these other things. Like, we know all of this stuff, but it's still like not motivating enough to actually do it. And I just think, it's just interesting, because it's like we throw that quote around so often, but it doesn't really help us in our...
No, it doesn't. It doesn't, and knowledge itself is not motivating. Knowledge is knowledge, and it's important. We need knowledge because it does form a part of the picture of helping us to make decisions, but it's not the motivation. And one of the interesting things about motivation is that the only way you get to find out about a particular person's motivation is by asking them, because everyone's motivation differs slightly. You can demonstrate this for yourself very easily by, going to the starting line of, I don't know, the City to Surf or some other road race like that, and just walk along the front and ask each person, why are you running this race? Why are you running this race? And every time you'll get a different answer. Because I've never run this distance before, I want to, or I'm running this in memory of my, father, mother, brother, sister, or I'm training for a longer race, or, whatever. But everyone's motivation will differ slightly. And therefore, when we're talking about behavioural change, it's really important to support that person to connect with what I call the sum of their own personally meaningful incentives, PMIs. So we need to understand from that person, what are all the things that matter to you in this behavioural change? What are all the reasons you have for doing this? Those reasons will be unique to that person.
And would you say, like, unpacking that and exploring that is probably like the first thing one should do when setting out to change?
Absolutely, yeah. We very often, I see this in working with other psychologists and working with coaches and so on, health coaches. We very quickly often jump straight for behavioural goals. So, someone might come to visit a professional and say, well, I've been thinking about giving up smoking, or I know it's not good for me, and and I've got a grandchild on the way, and I really want to sort of clean up myself and clean up my health before that grandchild comes. And often the professional then will go straight for, well, okay, have you thought about using patches? Have you thought about doing this, or here's some nicotine replacement therapy, and so on and so on. So we jump straight for what seems to be a solution, rather than first spending a little more time being curious about, well, how did this come into your mind? How did you start thinking about this? You've told me about this reason and this reason. What else makes that important for you to do this? What would your life look like if you didn't make that change? Would that life be okay with you 5 years from now? If so, why? And if not, why not? And so on. So that kind of conversation really explores all of those personally meaningful incentives, the PMIs, and helps that person then to get much, much more clarity about what's at stake here, and therefore make the best use of the knowledge that we were just talking about. You can only make really good use of knowledge when you understand how to apply it, and that's what that exploration does. Once we've done that, then certainly we can go to talking about doing particular things, following particular strategies, engaging in particular behaviours to modify that behaviour.
In your article, alongside the why beneath the why, you make a claim that I think is a little bit startling, and I must admit, when I first, so we've called this momentum, and when I first read about momentum, I was like, Simon's going to have to explain this a little bit more, because I don't know if I can buy this particular one. You make the claim that it's easier to make a behavioral change if you're busy or you're going through another change, versus sitting around at home, everything's quiet, you living a quiet life. So if I'm moving house, if I'm having a child, if I'm going to a new job, you're telling me that it's easier or it's better to make another significant behavioral change at that same time?
Yeah. Unquestionably, yes, is the answer. And this is one of my favourite theories of behavioural change, which I'll tell you a little more about. But it's a little bit counterintuitive, because often people approach behavioural change with a mindset of, I need to clear my plate. I need to get everything out of my mind so that I can focus just on this one thing. But in fact, about 10 years ago, there was a paper published, I think, in a journal called Behavioural Economics by some researchers who ended up labelling their theory the habit discontinuity hypothesis, or for short, the busyness theory of behavioural change. So this is what they did. They located 800 residents in the UK and decided that they wanted to use an intervention around kind of eco-conscious behaviours, using less water and recycling food waste and things like that. So they found these 800 people, and 400 of them had recently moved house. So this is how they constructed their sample. 800 total, half of them had recently moved house. Then all of those people were randomly assigned to two groups. So each group had a mix of people who had not engaged in any significant behavioural change and people who had just moved house. Then to group one, they shared information only. There's our knowledge question again. They gave information only to group one. To group two, they gave information and an intervention to support them to engage in different behaviours. What they found was that the group one that just received the information didn't do anything significantly different. In group two that received the intervention, the people who had just moved house made significantly more changes than the people who hadn't. So there's a couple of mechanisms that sit behind this that probably explain it quite well. The first is that all of our habits, whatever they are, whether it's eating chocolate or smoking a cigarette or sitting on the lounge watching TV, instead of exercising and so on, none of those habits exists in a vacuum. They're all contextually linked. They all connect to something in our lives. So, for example, when I walk into the kitchen to make coffee and the chocolate bar is sitting there on the shelf, that's the cue to grab the chocolate bar and eat some. Or when I sit down on the lounge opposite my television, that's the cue to turn it on. So all of our behaviours, whatever they are anchored in the contexts in which we live. So one possible mechanism here is that when we drastically change the environment, the context, when we disrupt those behavioural anchors, we also break the links between those anchors and the existing behaviours. Once those links are broken, it's easier for a new behaviour to come and step into its place and then be relinked to whatever new anchors might exist. So that's one. The other possible mechanism, of course, is simply that the idea of momentum, that we're all, because we're already in the process of doing things. It's the pushing a car analogy. If your car's broken down on the side of the road, getting it going from being stopped is super, super hard. Once it's moving, though, it's much easier to keep it going. So we're making use of the momentum to do that. And the same thing seems to happen with behavioural change. It's a super neat theory.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Now, I've moved house 4 times in the last 2 years, and Jesse is currently moving house, so we have no excuse. We're in our prime, Jesse.
Now's the time.
Yeah.
Now is the time.
And the interesting thing is that the window of opportunity seems to last about 3 months after the move as well. If it's a house move or whatever the major disruption is in the person's life, the window of opportunity for linking some new behaviours seems to last about 3 months.
That's good news. I have 3 months to join the gym. I will do it in 1 month and 23 days. I'll put it in the calendar.
1st of March.
1st of March.
I kind of want to throw a little bit of a spanner in the works with this whole topic, because I find it, I don't mean to brag on this, but I typically, if I want to change or I want to achieve something, I just start doing it and I'm pretty self-motivated. It's not a drastic struggle for me, but I do know other people who they've questioned me on this and they've been like, how do you just do that? Or they've said it's just my personality. And I hear that quite a lot, that there's a thing such as a highly motivated person. And I don't know what the opposite of that would be, if it's just titled an unmotivated person. I don't know if there's another word, but I have heard that there is this idea of people being more highly motivated just in their personality. Is that true? What do you think about that? Or how do we go about that if we are one of those people who just really struggles to keep things going or to get that excitement to change or whatever?
It's a good question, and I'm not sure that we can. I mean, we use that phrase "highly motivated," and that makes us think that motivation is a bit like a fuel tank, and some people have a tank full of motivation, and some people have a tank that has no motivation in it whatsoever. First of all, I'm not sure that we can actually quantify motivation in that way. I don't think motivation is something that's quantifiable. Secondly, we all, except in some very extreme cases, and those very extreme cases, I'm thinking of people, for example, who have very, very, very severe depressive mental illness, and one of the features of such mental illness, which is uncommon, is that people pretty much lose all motivation to do anything in their lives.
Mhm.
So, they often will just sit and quite literally not do anything for extended periods of time. So, so I'm going to say, well, that's an exceptional circumstance. So let's not overly focus on that. If we talk about the general population, we all have motivation all the time to do something, and that motivation might be to go for a walk, or eat an apple, or it might be motivation to eat chocolate and watch The Simpsons on TV. We've got motivation to do something. So when someone says to me, like you just had, Zanita, I find that when I I decide to make a change and I just do it. It sort of comes fairly easily and naturally, and I build it into my day. My guess is that the thing that you're choosing to change is really strongly aligned with those things that we were talking about before, your underlying beliefs, your underlying values, your underlying attitudes towards yourself and the world around you and people and so on. And therefore, it's an easy thing to do. And I'll demonstrate what I mean, if I can, by asking you a question. And that question is, would you be happy to share a behavioural change, perhaps a recent one that comes to mind that you've made that was super easy to just build into your daily routine?
Sure. I think probably the most recent one is I realized that I got into the scrolling thing on social media first thing when I would wake up. And so I just bought an alarm clock and I switched it, and it's helped.
Wonderful. So you're giving yourself a cue there. That disrupts the usual pattern of what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's important. That's a bit like having a barrier on the freeway. If you drive up and down the freeway every day, and one day you're driving on such and such a date, I will down it, and there's a barrier across the road, you're forced now to take a different route. In other words, you have to engage in a new behaviour. So that's what your alarm clock has done. It's acted as a sort of a roadblock, and now it forces you to take a different behaviour. But I'm now going to ask you to set yourself a goal, and I want you to just, when I've asked you to set this goal, just give me a rating out of 10 for how confident you are that you'll be able to do this consistently starting tomorrow morning. So 10 is the highest. 10 means I'm super, super confident I can do this starting tomorrow morning. So here's the new behavioural goal I want you to set for yourself. I want you to remove the alarm clock from your bed, and when you wake up in the morning, I want you to set a timer on your watch, and I want you to scroll social media for 30 minutes at a time. How confident are you you'll be doing that starting tomorrow morning?
Probably 8 out of 10 confident.
Wow.
You're 8 out of 10 confident that you would do that tomorrow morning, just on the basis of me asking you?
Well, yeah, I guess if you're asking me to take the alarm clock out of my room and...
Wow. Okay. Well, in that case, I'm going to ask you to go to your bank and with your...
I think if everybody was like Zanita, Simon, there would be no need for therapists. She'd put you all out of a job if everybody was like her.
So let me ask you a slightly different question, Zanita. So you're confident. So what I'm hearing in that is that you're someone who's generally confident about your capacity to make changes. What if I asked you about likelihood? How likely is it that you will start doing that tomorrow morning? Same scale, 0 to 10. 10's the highest.
Like 10, I won't. I wouldn't do it.
Oh, so,
do you mean
like 0?
The same thing
0.
if I was still... Oh, 0 then, yeah.
Yeah. So you just wouldn't do it?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
I think also because you've brought it up, though, there's more of a motivation for me to prove it.
you're determined now
Well,
to
thanks.
not
I
do
mean,
it
look,
because
thank you for crediting me with some of that, but honestly, it comes from you because it simply doesn't align with what's important to you. I've asked you to do something that's so far misaligned from what matters to you. Spend 30 minutes every morning before you even move scrolling. I mean, this is directly in contravention to what you decided really mattered to you. So it's your own beliefs and values and attitudes that are supporting you to do particular things, and also, importantly, inhibiting you from doing other things. For example, I mean, here's another example about why values and beliefs are so important. If I asked you to set a goal of every morning at 5:30 a.m. going and stealing your neighbour's milk delivery from their front porch, how likely are you to do that?
Not likely.
Not at all. On the other hand, if I asked you to set a goal of every afternoon going to your neighbour and just knocking on the door and saying, "Hi there, just dropping by to see how everything's going and see if there's anything I can do for you," how likely are you to do that?
Yeah, much more likely.
Much more likely, yeah. One aligns really strongly with your own underlying beliefs and values, and the other clearly doesn't. And so that's why getting to that point of really understanding beliefs, values, attitudes, and so on is important, because they're the things that fundamentally support us to be able to engage in any behavioural change.
we're learning so much about you, Zenita. This is a wonderful.
I'm an open book.
I am wondering about so we've talked about motivation a bit. I'm wondering, how does willpower or discipline fit into this equation? And I'm particularly thinking about this in the context of, I'm a man. There's a lot of young men listening to podcasts like this. There's a lot of young men listening to macho podcasts about, getting up at 4 a.m. to lift weights for 2 hours and, do ice plunges and all that sort of stuff. And there's this sort of subculture now forming around this whole discipline willpower movement. And obviously there's a lot of toxicity in it, but I perhaps some of it is beneficial. How do you figure that whole subculture and the importance of discipline or willpower, or are they two different things? I'm not sure if you could say that willpower and discipline are similar. Are they separate? Yeah.
I think so. So for a start, I think it's important to recognise that that willpower, or the words willpower and discipline, are kind of everyday words that we've tried to recruit to explain something pretty complex in terms of human beings and behavioural change, among other things. Again, if we were to, put 100 people in a room and say, what's your definition of willpower, and what's yours, and what's yours, and what's your definition of discipline, and yours, we'd probably get a bunch of different answers. So we need to just be a little cautious, because we're talking about something that probably isn't super clearly defined to start with. That said, in some ways, I think we could think of some people use willpower as an explanation for engaging in a behaviour and keeping going with it. It may be that I think, to use your exercise analogy, I think of willpower a bit like a muscle up. That exercise you do in the gym where you stand, there's a bar above you. First you pull yourself up into a chin up, and then you keep going and push yourself right up until you've got straight arms. So using willpower to make a behavioural change is a bit like a muscle up. It's using something inside you to kind of push this along. I think willpower can be really useful in the very initial stage of a behavioural change, and that's often when people are still kind of wrestling some fears and worries about what it might look like, how it might turn out, whether it's going to be successful or not. So sometimes you can have this really great plan in place about what you're going to do, and still have that little nagging voice in the back of your mind that says, well, what if it fails, or what if this doesn't work, something like that. So sometimes willpower can be useful just to give you a little bit of a nudge over the edge. Think of someone standing, someone who's about to bungee jump. That last little nudge to sort of lean backwards and fall off the cliff. So willpower could be a little like that. I think we could possibly. I'm thinking of examples like Olympic runners. People who perform amazing feats of human endurance, and we've all seen footage of people getting towards the end of those races, and sometimes people, their muscles literally give up. They collapse on the ground, and sometimes they stumble or drag themselves across the finishing line. What's going on there that's helping them to keep going? And I'm not sure that I'm super clear on the answer. We could say that some people use willpower, but maybe also, some people are calling to mind all those original, values and beliefs and incentives that they had. This is really important to me to keep doing this, so I'm going to keep going. So I don't know. Well, I think where I end up settling on this is that willpower is a little like describing some different different aspects of the same thing. Jesse, if I asked you to use 2 words to describe an apple, which 2 words come to mind for you?
Red and fruit.
Red and fruit, okay. And I'm going to use green and crunchy. Now we're both describing an apple, but we're using sort of different terms to do it. We're thinking about it in different ways. If you look at an apple from the side, it looks different from if you look at it from the top, and so on. So I think maybe that's partly what's going on with the idea of willpower. That it's a means of explaining essentially the same things, but from a slightly different perspective. And we can if we talk about the other part of your question was about discipline. Discipline, I think of much more as a strategy that can be used. It's not, discipline is not always useful. There are some circumstances where we can be overly disciplined, and that can get in the way of us making a change. When we need more flexibility to be able to do something, if you rigidly apply the same process all the time, then that may not be so successful. However, discipline, I think, is a useful strategy, or can be a useful strategy that essentially helps to embed in our unconscious mind the repetition of the behaviour that we want to follow. So if we think about having a daily discipline, that discipline might be getting up at 6:30 a.m. Praying for a brief period of time, reading or journaling for a brief period of time, preparing a nutritious breakfast, going for a walk, et cetera, et cetera. So we sort of structure our days like that. And you could say, well, that's discipline that's doing that. I could equally say, though, I think that what we're seeing there is the outcome of someone who has structured a life around the values and the beliefs they have, that they hold on to really dearly and that really matter to them. So again, I think we can absolutely use the words, and I think what we might be doing is using just sort of looking at the same thing from a slightly different perspective.
That's really interesting, and I don't want to be condemnatory or anything like that, because I know that a lot of people really do struggle to do a lot of people, I'm sure, are listening to what you just said, in terms of that early morning routine and thinking, oh, I probably would be a better person, or I would have a better quality of life if I did that. So does that mean then, if I want to do those things, but I don't do them, does that mean that my values really are not there? That I don't have strong enough convictions about what I
Oh,
really
yeah,
want in
great question.
life to actually follow through?
Yeah, yeah. I think it points back to a little earlier in our conversation where we talked about human beings being complex with multiple values and multiple needs. We're not, we're not sort of one-dimensional figures that just want one thing, or just need one thing, or just value one thing. We have lots of different values, and sometimes those values harmonise with each other. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they rub up against each other. So my first port of call in that example that you just gave, Jesse, would be to wonder what else is going on that the person does want to do at that time, and what are the values that's based upon. And that's going to give me some insight into, into the internal struggle that they might feel at that time, the internal tension, or ambivalence was the word that we used before. And once we have some clarity about that, then perhaps we can have a deeper discussion about what the person might or might not want to do differently right now.
That makes sense.
When we're talking about habits and behaviors that we want to change, I guess they're things that we obviously don't intentionally start doing, because typically, like we spoke about at the beginning of the episode, some of them have a negative connotation, and we want to be healthier and we want to be better, but we just aren't for whatever reason. And I guess a lot of those times those things are because of our culture and our society. Like advertising knows, for example, our weaknesses. Amazon knows how to get us to like buy something really quickly. So how can we kind of how can we stop falling prey to those kind of things? Because, for example, I mentioned my habit of like scrolling when I woke up, but that wasn't a reality 10 years ago because it just social media wasn't a thing. It's just something that's become a habit for so many of us. So are there ways that we can, I guess, be more mindful about society and the culture around us so that we don't find ourselves 10 years down the road in more negative habits?
Yeah, the wonderful question, Zanita, and it sort of brings several things to mind. The first is that, and we've kind of named this already in this discussion, but the first is that our behaviour never exists in a vacuum. It always exists in a context. So to use the example of marketers delivering messaging to give us that feeling of a fear of missing out, or a fear of wanting more, that then prompts us to purchase something online. The way that we can demonstrate the contextual effect of that is simply by taking your phone away, or putting you in a place where you don't have your phone. And once that sort of direct pathway has gone, you won't be making those purchases, because you're not receiving the cue that says, oh, if I don't do that now, I'm not going to be like other people. I'm going to miss out on something great, or whatever it might be. So behaviour always occurs in a context, and therefore, if we're having conversations with someone about behavioural change, or even if we're thinking just about our own behavioural change, it's important that we think about ourselves in that context. And one of the ways to do that is to, if you're reflecting on your own behaviour, to ask yourself the question: when I do X, and X is perhaps the behaviour that you want to be different, what else is going on around me at the time? When I do X, what else is going on around me at the time? And that question helps you to start thinking about, all of those contextual factors. And that's knowledge. Yes, knowledge can be powerful. Knowledge can be useful, and then we can make use of that knowledge to help us to engage in changes. The other thing the other part of this that I would say is that it's important for all of us to. And look, I want to be careful here because I don't want to paint a picture of the world as a dark and dangerous place that is going to be the end of all of us. But we do need to be wise about what's going on around us. Yes, we all know that we all know that companies use colours to evoke particular feelings. When you walk into a supermarket, there are things that are stacked on those long shelves, and there are also things that are at the front of the aisle, facing you as you walk into the aisle. Now, manufacturers pay a lot of extra money to have those things right there because they know that that's the first thing you're going to see, and you're much more likely to just pick that up than walk down the associated aisle and make a selection from the range of products. So we know all of those kind of marketing tactics and invitations to purchase and so on that companies use. How do we combat that? Well, the first is to recognise that that's going on. There's a sort of a truism, I guess, about and this maybe applies to social media specifically, but the truism goes: if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. So if you're scrolling a free social media feed of some sort, then you can guarantee that there's an effort behind that to create and evoke particular thoughts and feelings and responses in you. And it's important that we recognise that that's what's going on, and important that we also have some tools to be able to manage that. One of the most straightforward tools is simply delay. So we've in our conversation we've talked about delay not being a good thing. If you decide you're going to make a behavioural change, do it. Don't say I'll do it on January 1 or in 2 weeks' time. Jesse, don't join that gym in 1 month and 13 days. Join today. So in that context, delay is not a good thing. In other contexts, it is though. So for example, if you walk into the supermarket and you have no intention of buying chocolate, and there on an aisle end are all these blocks of chocolate that are discounted, 3 for the price of 2, 50% off for the second one, whatever the discount might be, and you feel that, oh, that looks nice, then a great strategy is to say, okay, that's still going to be there at the end of my supermarket trip. I will go and do everything else first, and I'll consider it while I'm doing the rest of my shopping. So recognise that initial impulse to act, and then choose to delay it. Choose not to act in that moment. What's the likelihood that particular supermarket is going to sell all of that chocolate in the 20 minutes it takes you to walk around? Practically zero. What's the worst possible thing that could happen if they do? I don't know. You don't buy chocolate. I mean, it's hardly kind of life-changing. So some of these strategies around just digging a little deeper behind that initial impulse that we feel can be useful strategies. So we do need to walk through the world wisely. We do need to recognise that there are companies that are all the time trying to market to us, and this is not. I want to be really clear here. These are legitimate human activities. Those companies have shareholders. Those shareholders expect those companies to move the product, sell the product. So the companies use insights from behavioural science to do that. So there's nothing really remarkable about that. But we don't need to allow ourselves simply to be automatically, manipulated by that. again, if we come back to the discussion about values and beliefs, the more strongly you feel connected to your own underlying values and beliefs, the more clearly you've been able to articulate those to yourself. The more that you construct a life around those things, the less susceptible generally you will be to some of those kind of transient influences, because you'll see them and recognise them for what they are, and recognise that they don't align with things that really matter to you. And again, here's the easy illustration of that. On one aisle end is chocolate, 3 for the price of 2, and that feels like it's pretty enticing to you. The aisle end right next to it has antiseptic bottle wash for babies' bottles, 3 for the price of 2. Do you look at that and go, "Oh my goodness, 3 for the price of 2"? Well, maybe if you got a baby and you're washing a lot of bottles, then yeah, you would. But if that's not you, that's not going to say anything to you at all. So recognise that if something is kind of grabbing you in that way, at some level, it's speaking to a need that you have. But that's not the only need you have. The choice is now yours to decide which of those needs you're going to honour in that moment.
I've even found myself doing this. It's so funny. As you've been talking, I've been reminding myself of all the things that I do. And one of the things I've even noticed with myself, online shopping is just like the worst for me, because it's so much easier. You don't have to go anywhere. You're just like flicking through your phone. Suddenly Amazon pops up with a random deal that just seems so good. And I've noticed that sometimes what I've done is I will look at the item, I'll click add to cart, and then I'll just flick to another tab.
Yeah.
I'm doing something else. I'm watching a video. I'm doing some work. And then after half an hour, I'll flick back to that tab. I'll look at the thing that I added to cart, and I'll just go to myself, why did I do that?
Yeah.
And just hit delete,
Yeah.
And I almost feel kind of like disgusted with myself that I would do such a flippant purchase of something which I really don't want or need. It's something that just popped up and I was like, oh yeah, I'll get it. And then even having that 20 minutes, that even sometimes 10 minutes of separation is enough for me to kind of like slap myself metaphorically and go, yeah, I don't need that. Why did I even think that I needed that? It's so bizarre.
Well, and Jesse, rather than feeling disgusting yourself for reacting in that way, I want to encourage you to recognise that you're doing exactly what human beings are designed to do. We're designed to react to stimuli. That's how we, when you see food, you reach out and take it to eat because you need to, you need to satisfy hunger. When there's water there, you reach out and take it. So when the stimulus is there, we react to it. I want to encourage you to congratulate yourself for having put in place a strategy that enables you to respond rather than react to that stimulus. So there's the initial reaction there for sure, and you're then engaging in a strategy that enables you to step back, reflect, evaluate, and then come back to it, in a different frame of mind, and ultimately make a decision that you're much happier with in your life. Even though you might get an Amazon box on your doorstep that afternoon,
it does still happen.
The net result of that would probably be less happiness than the feeling that you have from having made that decision. Said, no, I don't need that.
Well, Zanita, I feel like we've learned a lot about ourselves and each other.
Thank you for coaching us, Simon.
My pleasure. Been a delightful conversation.
Yeah, it's been good.
If people want to find out more about things that you've written, things that you've done, and I also want to make sure that we don't forget to mention you have a podcast yourself. So do you want to tell the listeners
exactly.
a little bit if they want to find some of your stuff, your podcast, where do they go?
So thank you. Things. I mean, most of what I've written is for academic journals and book chapters. So if you happen to inhabit Google Scholar, look me up on Google Scholar, and you'll find plenty of links there. I've got an adjunct academic position at Avondale University in the Lifestyle Medicine and Health Research Centre. So a lot of my work, is done through that vehicle. And I work closely with Professor Darren Morton, who I'm sure many listeners would be familiar with. Darren and I have a podcast that we co-host. It's called the Lift Podcast, and it's a podcast about lifestyle medicine and about behavioural change. Which is a part of the process of lifestyle medicine. So, anything to do with nutrition, exercise, sleep, social connection, stress management, mind-body connection, curiosities about the way the world works and behavioural change. Tune in, and you'll possibly learn something new. Maybe you won't. Maybe you'll listen once and go, I'm going to go back and listen to Zanita and Jesse. They're way more fun.
Well, we will put the link in the show notes for people to figure that out for themselves.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
In the meantime, thank you for your passion and for your zest for life and your wisdom. We'll have to get you on for another topic.
Yeah, pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks, Zanita. Thanks, Jesse. Been great to meet you.